The beast returned to kill the human, then it saw its cubs calling him friend. Let's get one thing straight before we start. Nobody in the history of ever has looked at a 15-foot apex predator with claws like tent stakes and thought, yeah, that thing and I are gonna be pals. That's not how nature works. Nature works on a simple system called, who eats whom, and humans are usually somewhere in the middle of that list, right between goats and anything slower than a goat. Caliph did not care about any of that nuance. Caliph cared about one thing: the human who broke her mate's leg in 3 places was still breathing, and she intended to fix that oversight personally. She'd been walking for 6 days. Big cat-bear nightmare hybrids don't really do sprinting with purpose, they do relentless, geological patience, which is somehow scarier. Every step toward the human outpost was slow, deliberate, and soundtracked by nothing but wind and the occasional unlucky bird deciding today was a bad day to exist. Revenge, it turns out, does not require a soundtrack. It just requires teeth. Meanwhile, roughly 6 days and 0 clues away, Dale Ferris was losing an argument with a coffee machine. Dale was the outpost's junior systems engineer, which was a fancy way of saying, the guy who gets blamed when the air recyclers hiccup. He had a face built for sarcasm and a personality that made his superiors sigh audibly whenever his name came up in meetings. If there was an award for most likely to make a joke during a structural fire, Dale would have won it 3 years running, mostly because there had, in fact, been 3 fires, and yes, he had made jokes during all of them. You know, Dale said to the coffee machine, which had just produced something that looked like regret in liquid form, for a piece of technology built by a species that put people on 4 different planets, you really can't manage hot brown water. The machine said nothing, because it was a machine, and also because it had given up on Dale months ago. Dale had a reputation on the colony. Not a good one, exactly, but a memorable one. He was the guy who talks to the wildlife. Not in a cute Disney way, more in a mutter sarcastic commentary at anything with a heartbeat, including plants, way. The other colonists found it unsettling. The local fauna, for reasons nobody could quite explain, found it charming. This would become extremely relevant very soon. Months earlier, because every story worth telling has a flashback, and frankly this one earns it, a lightning strike during a dry season turned half the eastern ravine into a bonfire nobody asked for. Dale had been out there doing a routine terrain scan when the smoke rolled in, and that would have been a perfectly reasonable time to leave. Instead, Dale heard something crying. Not human crying. Something low, panicked, and very clearly stuck. Oh, absolutely not, Dale said out loud, to nobody, while already moving toward the sound. This is exactly how every horror movie starts. Guy hears crying, guy investigates, guy becomes a cautionary tale. He kept walking anyway. Because apparently his mouth and his feet had never once been on speaking terms. What he found in the ravine were 2 cubs, Caliph's cubs, though he had no idea whose kids they were at the time, wedged between 2 burning logs, too young and too terrified to figure out that the exit was 6 feet to their left. They were maybe the size of large dogs, all teeth and panic, and completely unequipped to deal with the fact that their world was currently on fire. Great, Dale muttered, already stripping off his jacket to smother the nearest flame. Great, wonderful, fantastic. This is definitely in my job description. Systems engineer, occasional fireman, apparently now a daycare provider for baby monsters. He got burned. Not badly, just enough to leave a scar on his forearm that he'd later describe as a souvenir from the dumbest decision of my life, and he got nipped once by a cub who did not understand that biting your rescuer is generally considered poor etiquette. But he got them out. One at a time, coughing, cursing, absolutely certain he was going to die doing something this monumentally stupid. He never told anyone the full story. Mostly because, I saved 2 apex predator babies from a wildfire and got bit for my trouble, sounded like the setup to a joke nobody would believe, and partly because he was busy pretending the whole thing hadn't happened. The cubs remembered, though. Cubs always remember the voice that pulled them out of the smoke. Which brings us back to the present, where Caliph had just crossed into sensor range of the outpost, and every alarm in a 2-kilometer radius decided this was the moment to have a collective nervous breakdown. Perimeter breach, Apex-class Predator, bearing 310, the automated system announced, in the tone of voice that machines use when they want you to know this is very serious without actually sounding concerned, because machines don't have the emotional range for concern. Dale was still holding his mug of regret coffee when 2 security officers dragged him out of his quarters at 2 in the morning. "Why me?" Dale asked, which was a fair question, all things considered. "Because you're the wildlife guy," one of them said. "I talk to plants." "That's not a qualification. You're the closest thing we've got to a wildlife guy who hasn't already run screaming, so congratulations, you're now the wildlife guy." Dale looked down at his coffee, looked up at the darkness beyond the perimeter fence, and made his peace with the fact that his evening had officially gone from bad to apocalyptic. Caliph emerged from the tree-line like something out of a nightmare that had personally offended you. She was massive, easily 15 feet from nose to tail, all muscle and matted fur and a set of teeth that looked like they'd been individually designed to end arguments. Her eyes locked onto Dale immediately, which was, frankly, rude, because Dale hadn't done anything wrong tonight specifically. Historically, sure, maybe. But not tonight. "Okay," Dale said, raising both hands, coffee mug still somehow intact in one of them. "Before we do whatever horrifying thing you're clearly planning to do, let's talk this through. I'm sure this is a misunderstanding. I get misunderstood a lot. Ask anyone. Terrible communicator. Truly, historically bad at explaining myself." Caliph growled, low and long, the kind of sound that vibrated in your chest before your ears even registered it. Right, that's not a yes, but it's also not immediate death, so I'm counting that as progress." She took a step forward. The ground actually shook a little, which Dale felt was showing off. "Look," Dale continued, because apparently his survival instinct had been replaced at some point with a compulsion to narrate his own death, "if this is about the leg thing, I want to state for the record that I have never broken anyone's leg. I've barely broken my own sleep schedule. I am, by every metric that matters, an extremely low-threat individual." Caliph did not care about metrics. Caliph cared about the specific human scent that had lingered near her injured mate weeks ago, and Dale's scent, through a series of unfortunate laundry day coincidences involving borrowed gear from another colonist, matched close enough to convict him in her mind. She lunged. And then 2 enormous, gangly, overexcited shapes came crashing out of the tree-line behind her, and everything about the night went sideways in the most confusing way possible. The cubs, no longer cub-sized, mind you, now somewhere in the awkward, significantly larger than a human but not yet as big as mom, teenage phase, barreled past Caliph entirely, ignored the very obvious tension in the air, and beelined straight for Dale like overgrown, apocalyptic puppies who had just spotted their favorite person at the dog park. "Oh no," Dale said, watching them approach at a speed that suggested braking was a concept they'd never encountered. "Oh no. He got tackled. Fully, completely tackled, coffee mug flying, dignity evaporating, by 2 adolescent apex predators who apparently remembered him with the enthusiasm of golden retrievers reuniting with their favorite human after a long day. The colony's badly calibrated translator device, strapped to a nearby security officer's belt for exactly this kind of scenario, did its best to render the sounds the cubs were making. What came out was a garbled, half-broken string of words that would haunt Dale's reputation for the rest of his life. Friend. Warm food man. Fire smell friend. Good friend. I have never, Dale said, from underneath approximately 600 pounds of affectionate murder beast, been so betrayed by my own dignity in my entire life. Caliph stopped mid-lunge. This requires some explanation, because predator brains don't exactly do emergency U-turns gracefully. She had spent 6 days walking, fueled entirely by grief and fury, building toward one single, satisfying conclusion. And now her own children, her own flesh and blood, the ones she'd spent months searching for after the fire had separated them from her, were rolling around on the ground with the human she'd come to kill, making sounds that any parent, regardless of species, would recognize instantly as pure, uncomplicated joy. It is, generally speaking, extremely inconvenient to have a well-planned revenge scheme derailed by your own kids. Ask any parent. They will confirm this without hesitation. Kalitha's growl faltered into something confused, something almost embarrassingly close to a whine. She took a step forward, not to attack now, but to actually look, properly look, at the scene in front of her. The scarring on the human's forearm. The way her cubs pressed against him without an ounce of fear. The way he smelled, underneath the coffee and the panic sweat, faintly of old smoke. The same smoke that had nearly taken her children from her. It took a long, tense moment, the kind where every security officer on the perimeter had their weapon half raised and their hands slightly shaking, before the pieces clicked into place in Kalitha's mind. This wasn't the human who'd hurt her mate. This was the human who'd pulled her babies out of a burning ravine while she'd been trapped on the far side of the fire, unable to reach them, certain she'd lost them for good. She had spent 6 days hunting the wrong scent. Kalith made a sound then, quieter, rougher, something that didn't need a translator to understand. It was the sound of an apology nobody had asked for and a gratitude nobody had expected. "Okay," Dale said, finally managing to sit up, cub slobber liberally applied to one side of his face. "I'm gonna go ahead and assume that noise means we're not doing the whole eating me plan anymore, because frankly I would like to keep my current arrangement of limbs." Kalith lowered her head. Not submissively, creatures like her didn't really do submissive, but in the universal posture of someone recalculating an entire evening's plans and feeling faintly embarrassed about it. The colony's security team lowered their weapons very, very slowly, the way you do when you're not entirely sure the situation has actually de-escalated or if everyone's just collectively decided to hope really hard. Over the following weeks, an arrangement formed. Not a friendship exactly. Dale was very insistent on that point, usually while pouring an alarming amount of meat rations into a bucket at the edge of the perimeter, but something adjacent to it. Kalith and her cubs began treating the outpost's boundary less like a battlefield and more like the world's most inconvenient in-law visit, showing up periodically to check on their favorite two-legged fire rescue service. Dale negotiated terms like a man signing a lease he desperately did not want but could not, for insurance reasons, get out of. Feeding schedules. Designated approach distances. An agreement that cub tackling would be limited to, quote, reasonable hours, and preferably not while I'm holding coffee. "You're basically the ambassador to the murder family now," one of the security officers told him, grinning. "I would like everyone to know," Dale said, staring at his 11th ruined coffee mug of the month, "that I did not apply for this job. I did not want this job. I have a degree in systems engineering, not large predator diplomacy." But he kept showing up at the perimeter fence anyway, bucket in hand, muttering sarcastic nothings at creatures that could end him in a single swipe and somehow, against every reasonable expectation of the universe, chose not to. Heroism, as it turns out, doesn't always look like charging into danger with a sword raised and a battle cry on your lips. Sometimes it looks like one exhausted, over-caffeinated engineer who just can't help himself when something's crying in a burning ravine, and who ends up, years later, still complaining about it, while quietly, without ever quite admitting it, becoming exactly the kind of person a beast might call friend.